we've got all kinds of stuff on the flights, kind of honing in on exactly what's going on with these flights, which flights, and trying to get our bearings. Because last time we had an interesting stream about the flights.
Conspiracy theories are entering a dangerous...
Information is the oxygen of the democracy.
There's so much evidence out there that even if less than 1% is true, that would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet.
I have been on a roll. Holy shit. I feel like I've been going at 1,000,000 miles an hour plugged into 10 different directions of trying to analyze these flights. And I got totally catfished by AI going down the wrong rabbit hole for like half a day. And now we're onto the right track. Now we're onto it. And I got a bunch of shit to share with you guys. There's this whole assassination attempt plot line on Candace Owens' life, which you guys know about as much as me, I think. We'll watch a little bit of Valhalla VFT because he's ex-Green Beret Special Forces and he knows a lot about the Special Forces world and about this unit in specific. He actually hit me up and was like, yo, is Candace safe? Because this unit is not messing around. And he did a really great short breakdown that we'll go over. But today I think we're going to stay focused on the flights. It won't be as nerdy and boring as the last time. We're going to be a little more speed fire, a little more general and big picture for normies, because last time was just about all the nerdy intensity I could take. Or maybe I'm just too deep in it now, and maybe I don't even realize how far in I am at this point. Let's not waste any more time, eh? I've been studying flights like a madman. And don't worry, we will get to these Egyptian flights, and it won't be as crazy as it looks. We got highlights to help us out. But I went on this wild goose chase that had me looking at all sorts of different planes. I found a secret Italian Air Force plane that's flying all kinds of secret missions that we'll just briefly touch on because it gives us all kinds of context for what the hell is going on out here. But to get that context, let's just remember these Egyptian planes that are doing sketchy things in Provo, Utah, right around when Charlie Kirk gets shot. And there's all kinds of anomalies in this data. But the question is, do the anomalies show us anything concrete that we can actually conclude anything based off of other than this is weird? And I would argue we're getting pretty damn close. And I am becoming to suspect more and more, the more I look at these flights, that there is something in this flight data that will crack this case and make this unavoidable. And I think we're getting relatively close here, because it is high time that we get this shit solved and figure out who exactly killed Charlie Kirk. And Candace is zeroing in real close, is what it sounds like from all of her shows. And then suddenly there's allegedly a hit out for her from a very serious unit that does not mess around. So, maybe in a minute, maybe what we should do is we should briefly touch in with Valhalla VFT and the French Foreign Legion and talk about the seriousness of the threat and the situation. And that'll prime us for what's in the data and just what exactly this flight data really does show, and what it might show, but it's hard to say. And then we'll get into some context of what other flight data shows to sort of get oriented to what is and is not normal and what we can and cannot infer from it, because that's a big piece of this right now. But let me just pull up our boy Nate. If I'm going to play him on silent for a second. If you're not familiar with Valhalla VFT, dope dude. Nate is an ex-Green Beret. And so he's got exactly the kind of experience you would want to talk to us about the French Foreign Legion and French Special Forces. And why exactly this? I know, don't worry. I know that there's no sound. We intentionally have no sound. Cool. Now we're prepped. Hey, look at this handsome man.
To the channel, everybody. And if you haven't been following Candace Owens' recent stuff, it's getting crazy out there, because she just put out a post the last couple days claiming that there is a credible and bought and paid for assassination plot out on her life by
Someone asked in the chat, who is this guy? This is Nate from Valhalla VFT. Highly recommend that you subscribe to Valhalla VFT. He's killing it. He's doing awesome reporting on Candace Owens and the whole story. He's very based, and he gets it. And as an ex-Green Beret, he has a really solid take on all of the military aspects of the Charlie Kirk assassination, the bullet, the trajectory, all that stuff. But he also has really great takes on all the rest of it. And in particular, when it comes to this allegation of this assassination attempt, he's one of the best sources that's out there.
By essentially the French government. And now a lot of people right out the gate said, oh, this is just Candace being Candace. She's being bombastic. She's being over the top. However, when I read this post, immediate striking things jumped out to me, given my background and my career, mainly the French units involved. Very, very interesting stuff that maybe make this more credible than everybody's realizing. Okay, so
that's the thing about Nate, is that he's evidence-based, and he's careful with what he will commit to, but he's also willing to entertain a theory. He's willing to think things through and give a crazy theory the benefit of the doubt if it really does make sense to him.
I know a lot of people don't know how all these, high-level tier
shout out to all the
military units and all this stuff works, but I'm your guy for that. And I'm going to walk you through it and talk a little bit about where this threat is potentially coming from. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Helps the channel. Assassination plot really is. All right, so first thing we got to do, of course, look at the actual post that Candace put out, and I'm going to break the whole thing down in detail following that. All right, here we go. All right, Candace says.
Okay, I've already read this on the stream. If you haven't already read Candace's post, go do that. We're not going to do it again today. Make some serious allegations, but you'll get the context. Basically, that France, with some cooperation from Israel and possibly other governments, put out a hit for, I think, $1.5 million of value, so to speak, on her head. Shout out to Real Bays in the chat.
And approved an assassination plot on her life. Not only that, but our leaders, I'm assuming she means the Trump administration, is also aware of this and has greenlit this. Pretty insane.
I don't think that her post necessarily implies that Trump and his people have greenlit it. I think that her post implies that there are people within the administration that might be acting on their own, or maybe the whole administration. But I suspect that it's more likely, I'd bet that she's more looking at specific people that are sort of bad actors within the Trump administration that have quietly greenlit and are working their own angles, as the deep state always does.
Sounds almost too unrealistic to be true until you look at what are the incentives. And you don't know about Candace and her coverage of Brigitte Macron. It starts to get a little bit interesting when it comes to that. Also, her coverage of...
Go back and watch my episode from last Friday about the Rothschilds and the French connection to Jeffrey Epstein and Israel, the French connection to power systems in Africa and the United States and around the world. There's a lot of incentive, and the Brigitte story is a big piece of it that spiderwebs into all these other stories. This whole cult, almost, for lack of a better term, is getting exposed, and there is every reason to shut people up that talk about it.
The Charlie Kirk case, her criticisms of Israel, all these different things. The incentives are unfortunately there from a lot of different angles. That doesn't necessarily mean it's credible. However, these units that she talks about are the first thing we need to break down, because it's very, very interesting. All right, so first thing we're going to look at, which she talks about, which is the National Gendarmerie Intervention Group, which she says is the group that's going to carry out the assassination attempt on her life. Now, that might sound like some sort of private contractor, Wagner group type of thing, but it's not. This is actually just France's Tier 1 domestic counterterrorism unit. Or you could think of it kind of like a Delta force that they use as a domestic police force, okay? So what do they specialize in? Right up front, domestic counterterrorism. Most of you guys actually know who this unit is. Historically, very, very famous unit. They were the ones who took down the 1988 plane hijack in Marseilles. So we're going to take a look at that here in a second.
It's freaking cool. I've never seen this original footage of them raiding this plane. It's pretty wild.
Hostage rescue, protection of government officials, high-level stuff like that domestically.
We'll watch just a little bit. This is old news footage. So there's terrorists barricaded up in the plane, and these are the French Foreign Legion coming in to storm the place.
It gives the snipers the chance they've been waiting for. The French news footage captures amazing scenes of the battle. A Gigien man is blasted out of the plane by gunshots.
Imagine being the cameraman that's got this on footage, dog.
So the point with this is extremely high level, highly trained expertise in things like breaching, sniping, all the different things that you would want if you needed to up after some trouble in life in the French Foreign Legion.
This is the guy that he's going to interview later this week.
Deep dive all the connections to all this for us later this week. But my point with that
Maybe
is
tonight?
you have people like former Navy SEALs, former operatives of...
What up, Baron? Shout out to Baron in the chat. So yeah, Nate explains how this specific, I think the 13th is basically composed of tier 1 guys like SEALs, Delta kind of guys that need a fresh start, that are largely criminals. Not all of them, but a lot of them are criminals that basically have nowhere to go. And then you just make a giant unit out of them, and they specialize in new identities, in giving you new identities. And when you're talking about a foreign force that's composed of foreigners that have this level of operational clearance, and they have this new identity capability to kind of, put on a new skin and go do whatever the mission requires, Nate was like, dude, this is a very serious unit that does this, like, not this exact kind of thing, but they are very capable. This is exactly who you would want to do this kind of thing. Because the other thing is that this unit is plausibly deniable. It's composed of foreigners that are, if they were to get caught doing something like this, then it would be very easy for France to discredit, deny, and just step away.
Now, a lot of people will be asking, like, why? Why would, the French government put out a hit on Candace Owens, a podcaster's life? Well, if you haven't followed her coverage on Brigitte Macron, which I'm not going to delve into, yeah, there's an extreme amount of incentive to shut Candace up. I mean, we know that Macron literally asked Donald Trump to shut her up. Donald Trump called Candace to try to shut her up. They've brought out a lawsuit to try to shut her up. And so when you look at it that way, the incentive is absolutely there to make Candace stop talking. There's no doubt about that, right? Her expose on becoming Brigitte is absolutely wild, okay? And that's not the only incentives out there on Candace Owens. Candace Owens is flying very, very close to the sun on a lot of different topics. Obviously, Crone stuff, very obviously the Charlie Kirk investigation that she's been putting on over the last 2 months, especially the ties to our greatest ally and their potential involvement, the Egyptian government potentially being involved, and then obviously her insane coverage delving into all of the corruption and sketchiness behind TPUSA.
Yeah, the Egyptian government possibly being involved. Let's talk about it. Let's just get straight to the point here, eh? Let's not diddle around. So far, we have located 5 Egyptian planes that have made trips to Provo, Utah. Okay, and what I've done is I paid for the highest tier package, the $500 tier package, as you guys saw last time, so that I can access 3 years worth of flight data. Yeah, is it Egypt? That is the big question. Is it Egypt? If you're not familiar with the Egypt-Israel relationship, Egypt's relationship to the kind of global and European deep state, Egypt is a very key player because of the Suez Canal. And if you notice the word Suez, that's not an Egyptian word. France was very involved. The Rothschilds, actually, were very involved in the Suez Canal's building and ownership for a long time. And there's all these planes that we have now located in Provo during 2025. Many of them were a ways before Charlie Kirk was actually assassinated, but there's a few that were actually there right then, leaving that morning, for example. And there's some very weird flight patterns, and they have very weird flight profiles. And what I've done is I've gone through and I've highlighted all of their trips to the United States over the last 3 years, and they each have their own profile when you look at them. For example, SUBGM, here's how you look at it. On the right, I've got UTC time codes because that actually turns out to be a little easier to deal with in some cases. Then on the left, I've got local time codes, but it's the same exact chart, left and right. Okay, so these both are the exact same. And highlighted in blue, I've got to get my markers on my new screen on my screen here so that I know what you guys can see when you're looking. So highlighted in blue is a trip to the U.S. And with this red marker right here, that's a trip to Provo. Okay. And you notice it goes bottom up, right? So July 7th is the start of their journey, and July 19th, they fly back to Cairo. You'll notice that they always fly, it seems, almost always, they fly Cairo to Paris, and then Paris to a to a layover point, and then on to sort of like the interior of the trip, and then they fly back to Goose Bay in this case, which is significant. We're going to come back to this. And then Goose Bay to Paris, and then Paris to Cairo, okay? That will all become relevant later. And over here, it's the exact same flights. It's just in different time codes for different types of reference. So that happened with this plane in July to April, okay? And it stayed in Provo for 3 days right here before flying back to Goose Bay. Oh, no, sorry. 6 days right there. Oh, no, even more. Because it went Minot to Provo, and then this is just Provo to Provo, and then it's Provo to Goose Bay in this case. And the Provo to Provo is allegedly a 1-hour flight. And on some of these flights, the data is a little weird, but in some cases, it's just time zones making it look weird, and it's easy to get confused if you're new to this shit, which I am. So there's been a long learning curve with this. This plane in particular is mostly doing these weird kind of semi-classified trips over in Egypt where there'll be a takeoff but no landing, or there'll be no takeoff but there'll be a landing. It'll just appear out of the desert. Its transponder will just magically turn on, and then it'll come and land back into Cairo. So this plane, when you look at this data on the website, this plane is obviously being used for some sort of intelligence operations, for some sort of classified stuff. I'm not sure if this chart is here, SUBGM. I think we were on SUBGM, right? Yeah, SUBGM. So this is the same chart right here on the internet. And when you go down into all of these Cairo flights that have missing takeoffs or landings, and you actually look at them, you press play, and it'll show you on the map that this one is just mid-flight over the desert. This one's coming in from the south, and it just turns on its transponder mid-flight and then comes in and lands in Cairo, which is, maybe that's abnormal. We'd have to see. We'd have to compare it to other similar types of planes. And then when you zoom in on the Cairo airport, oh, okay, so this one is actually taking off from Cairo, and then it turns off its transponder mid-flight. Is what this one is. Then the next one will probably be it coming back in from whenever its transponder was off. It can get pretty confusing pretty quick, but you get the profile of like, okay, this plane is just hanging out mostly in Cairo with a few trips to, here's Rome. And then here's a whole other trip to the United States, but it's a different type of trip. But again, this trip goes Cairo to Paris, Paris to Goose Bay, and then Goose Bay to St. Louis, where it hangs out for a while and does some flights or not flights or who knows. There's this whole flight here that seems to be it just turning on its transponder or doing something secret inside of U.S. airspace. I assume it's just turning on its transponder or doing a test on the runway. Hangs out, then it goes back to Goose Bay to Paris, Paris to Cairo, okay? And this Goose Bay to Paris to Cairo route is starting to look pretty significant by my guesstimate. Not an expert, but even a layman should be able to understand the basic explanation for these things, and there should be an explanation for it, right? Yeah, Mino is going to enter the story here too. SUBTV, a lot more U.S. activity here. And you'll see Lincoln a whole lot. Omaha and Lincoln, especially Lincoln. Cairo to Paris, Paris to Omaha, so it skips Goose Bay, Omaha to Lincoln, Lincoln to Wilmington, Delaware again, Wilmington, Delaware to Cairo. So it's important to note that it can fly from the U.S. to Cairo, and we'll get into that more in the future here. Again, Cairo to Paris, Paris to Omaha, Omaha to Lincoln, Lincoln to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. This was in October. In September, this one is hanging out over in Egypt. Another trip, Cairo to Paris, Paris to Wichita, Wichita to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. Here's another Provo trip. Back in May, Cairo to Paris, Paris to Minot, Minot to Provo, Provo to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. Okay, so this is that same trajectory out of Provo to Wilmington, Delaware, where that weird Satis hangar is that Candace honed in on. So that's kind of weird. Here's a long trip to the United States. Cairo to Paris, Paris to Omaha, Omaha to Lincoln, Lincoln to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo, Cairo back to Paris, Paris to Detroit, Detroit to Wichita, Wichita to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. Okay, Cairo to Paris, Paris to Detroit, Detroit, Lincoln, Lincoln, Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. Cairo to Paris, Paris to Wichita, Wichita to Wilmington, Wilmington to Cairo. Cairo, Paris, Paris, Wichita, Wichita, Wilmington, Wilmington, Cairo. Okay, over and over and over. And they each have their own kind of profile. This one has some Detroit where most of the others don't, but it seems to always be Cairo to Paris. So maybe it's a stop to fuel up. Maybe before they cross the Atlantic, they're fueling up in Paris. Okay? Could be. We're gonna try to search for the most naive explanations we can. We're going to try to search for the most non-conspiratorial explanations that we can. Okay? Because it's easy to get down a rabbit hole. I got down a whole rabbit hole for a whole day where Claude got me onto thinking that there was some grand conspiracy where, or rather it got me to thinking that there was evidence of the grand conspiracy where there was like a 1 hour time difference on all the flights that were in daylight savings time. And I was like, wait a minute. So Egypt doesn't observe daylight savings time and Israel does, and there's a 1 hour difference only during daylight savings time? Like, are they spoofing these transponders? Maybe, but it turns out that's not evidence because A, Egypt doesn't observe daylight savings time since 2023, or rather they started observing daylight savings time in 2023. And B, actually, Claude basically just started hallucinating because we got past the data and into the analysis, and then it stopped referencing the data, and it started over-extrapolating on the data. And so it's really important if you use AI for anything that you are double-checking it, rechecking it with the data, manually checking it yourself, and looking for hallucinations and confirmation bias and all of the AI traps. Because it's really easy to get trapped by AI and come to conclusions that are not sound or are based just completely false. So don't get trapped. I almost got trapped. It's easy to do. So that's what had us return to this manual method. And the manual method shows you plenty. SUBND has, I just highlighted a recent trip from Cairo to Nice and back. I don't really know how it does 2 trips from Cairo to Nice in a row. Diverted to Cairo. So it tried to go to Nice and then it failed and went back to Cairo, I suppose. Then it went to Nice. Who knows? But here's the trip to Provo right when Charlie was there. Right when Charlie gets killed. This plane is in Provo while he gets killed. Okay? And again, it goes Cairo to Paris, Paris to Goose Bay to Minot, Minot to Provo, Provo to Provo, Provo to Provo, Provo to Goose Bay to Paris, Paris to Cairo. Very suspicious flight pattern here. And this Provo to Provo one in the middle, I'm pretty sure that this is the one where they just seem to have turned on their transponder on the runway. Right now we're looking at, these are all in UTC, Universal Time Code. This is in local time. So Provo to Provo, 2:40 p.m. Oh no, that's their scheduled time of departure. Their actual transponder was on around like 1:40 p.m. Yeah. With no actual departure time. A little weird. So they don't actually leave. They just turn on their transponder, turn on their electrical systems, maybe sending some comms. My no is pronounced my not. Thank you. Yeah, I'm getting French land over here. I've been doing too much French. This plane is mostly hanging out in Cairo any other time of the year, except for this trip way back in 2024 to Provo as well. And again this time, and we're going over this on purpose because it becomes relevant, Cairo to Paris, Paris to Goose Bay to Salt Lake City, Salt Lake to Provo, Provo to Provo, Provo to Goose Bay back to Paris, and then Paris back to Cairo. So the Paris to Goose Bay connection will be very significant. And note that the Paris to Goose Bay connection is most typical on the flights to Provo, which is a tiny little airport. This one I just made a note that there's these Maybe they're just testing it in St. Louis. We'll come back to that. But there's these flights that aren't flights in St. Louis by a foreign military aircraft. And again, this one is Cairo to Paris, Paris to Goose Bay to St. Louis. It hangs out in St. Louis, and then back to Goose Bay, back to Paris, back to Cairo. Okay. SUBTU. This one was also in Provo. And this one goes Cairo to Paris, Paris to Minot to Provo, Provo to Wilmington, Delaware, Delaware to Cairo. Then Cairo back to Paris, then Paris to Omaha, then Omaha to Lincoln, then Lincoln to Wilmington, Delaware, then Wilmington to Cairo. This is back in April. And this is before I got really precise with my highlighting. A lot of this highlighting is in Cairo, but throughout this whole time period, there are multiple trips. There's a trip there to the U.S. There's a trip here to the U.S. There's a trip down here to the U.S. And so I'm going to have to go back through and be more precise in my highlighting on this one, because this was right when I was first starting, and I didn't realize how much time I was going to want to invest in being precise here. This one, SUBTT, one of our other planes that went to Provo. And this one is Cairo to Paris, Paris to Minot, Minot to Provo, Provo to Wilmington, Delaware, and then Delaware all the way back to Cairo. This is the one that leaves the day that Charlie is shot. And in local time, it goes Provo to Delaware, and it leaves at 7:14 a.m. that early that morning, even though it was scheduled to leave later, around 11. Down here, this other trip is not to Provo. So this is before I honed in on using this bar for Provo. Okay, so we've seen a bit of a pattern here in terms of where they go and how they get there. Here's another trip to Provo, same plane, back in April. Okay, I still want to go back to the timeline and look at what was happening during each of these planes' times in Provo. What did that correlate to? What had happened before that? Because this Provo stuff is kind of weird. There might be a legitimate explanation for it, but it's kind of weird. And this time it goes Cairo to Paris, Paris to Williston, Williston to Provo, Provo to Wilmington, Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware back to Cairo. Okay. So we're honing in on a bit of a pattern in terms of how they're getting to Provo. So the question is, why are they going to Provo? Why are we going to Provo? Maybe there's a legitimate explanation. Let's try to get a legitimate explanation out here. Okay. And here we're going to do some very basic AI summaries that are not super complicated, to just sort of like think through and challenge some thought processes here. Because maybe there's a legit explanation, right? Like they go to Lincoln, Nebraska all the time, right? Why would Egyptian planes be going to Lincoln, Nebraska? Why would Egyptian planes be going and spending so much time in Lincoln, Nebraska? Well, because Duncan Aviation actually has its biggest headquarters in Lincoln, Nebraska. So the most likely explanation is that Duncan Aviation's main headquarters and largest maintenance facility being located right by Lincoln Airport in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they have a long-term maintenance contract with the Egyptian government since 1999, according to John Cullen. I think his research dug that up. So they maintain the Egyptian government's jets, their Falcon aircrafts, their Gulfstreams. It's their primary and largest facility. So it kind of makes sense that we would see, once a year or so trips to Lincoln, Nebraska. Because why else are you going to Lincoln, Nebraska, right? Sorry, Nebraska, but come on. Come on. So why it might not be a conspiracy? Because the pattern is consistent with scheduled maintenance. Aircraft of this type require major checks. Get out of here, dictionary. Once every, 1.5 to 2 years. Test flights from that location would be standard procedure. No legitimate MRO would release an aircraft without some test flights, at least if they were doing anything structural, mechanical, etc., right? Duration matches major maintenance timeline. This AI analysis only had access to a little bit of the flight data, but when we see it go to Lincoln, Nebraska, it spends a little bit of time there usually. So this makes sense for Lincoln, Nebraska. About 6 to 8 weeks is typical for C-check. And there's a documented relationship between Duncan Aviation and the Egyptian government. Duncan Aviation apparently services many foreign governments' business jets. Cool. So does that explain going to Provo? Well, actually, it might. It might. There is a Duncan Aviation location in Provo, Utah. It's like, does this debunk the whole conspiracy? Does this debunk everything? I love how AI is actually citing John Cullen as a source. That's hilarious and awesome. But apparently, Duncan Aviation does operate a satellite maintenance facility at Provo. And apparently, they specialize in Gulfstream aircrafts. But they're also capable of working on Falcons, apparently. Most of these aircrafts that we're talking about are Falcons. And Falcons are specifically designed to have a super long range. They're designed to fly really far, relatively fast. Yeah, Minot and Williston is in North Dakota, correct. So, Duncan Aviation has multiple locations. They have Battle Creek, Michigan, too. Interesting, that might explain the Michigan visits. But they have Lincoln, Nebraska, and Provo, Utah, just by chance, right? So it just so happens that Charlie Kirk is getting his speech on right where there's this maintenance facility. Perfectly possible coincidence, okay? Provo is more specialized. It's definitely not as expansive as Lincoln, but it focuses on Gulfstream maintenance, avionics work, inspections. Okay, so maybe they're doing little stopovers for maintenance in Provo, and it's just unfortunate coincidence that they're doing that. The Egyptian military is doing that with a couple of their jets right when Charlie gets assassinated. And then one of them flies over to this weird French hangar with this weird French connection. Maybe it's all just a big coincidence. Or maybe it's a great cover story. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, it looks like Baron's going live right now. Sorry, Baron. Took me all day to get my shit ready because I was moving houses. So, unfortunately, we're going to go into Baron's time a little bit. Although I thought you guys said that he went live at 6, not at 5. I'm in the same time zone as him. So, I don't know what the story is there. So, why Provo for the Egyptian aircrafts? Well, maybe it's when Lincoln is at capacity, right? Maybe it's less congested than Lincoln. AI is just spitballing why this might explain things, why it might not be a big conspiracy. Because it's important to double check yourself, you know? Try to debunk your own theory. Oh, he's at 6 Eastern. I get it. But Provo has a Gulfstream specialization, and the planes in question are not Gulfstreams. The planes in question, specifically the most suspicious ones, are these, where does it say it? Dassault Falcon 7X. These guys that fly really far, relatively fast. Dassault Falcon 7X. These two. They do have a couple of Gulfstreams. And those Gulfstreams have been to Provo via Paris, Goose Bay, Minot. Pretty roundabout way to get to a maintenance stop, if you asked me. Right? And we'll get to that in just a second. So, aircraft capabilities versus actual routes. I wanted to know, could these planes fly directly from Egypt all the way to Provo? Could they? The Falcon 7X maximum, and remember, this is AI. It's, grain of salt, give or take. So the Falcon 7X has a maximum range of about 6,000 nautical miles, give or take, apparently. And Cairo to Provo distance is just a tiny hair over that, apparently. Just barely outside of nonstop range, according to Claude. Good girl, Jeech. The Gulfstreams have a shorter range. Both Gulfstreams do. It's outside of range for Gulfstreams. They would have to refuel, apparently. So why Paris and Goose Bay? Why 2 stops? Right? Why 2 stops? And this is BGM. Let's get out BTU, BNC. I've got so many freaking Egyptian planes open in here now. BTU, BTT. September, Lincoln, Omaha, Paris, Cairo. Oh, actually, this is one of the ones that doesn't go to it. Goose Bay, BND goes to Goose Bay. BPE, BNO, BNC, BTU, BGM, BTV. I got 2 BTUs open. BND. All right. Goose Bay, where you at? Right there. I just want to get a visual on Goose Bay for us. Goose Bay is way up here in northern Quebecois. Very remote, Goose Bay is. But remember, all you flat earthers out there, remember that when planes fly across the whole globe, they go with the curve and they go up here for whatever reason. Who knows? Who knows? It's because it's a big conspiracy. And so it's very common for there to be stops up here on this northern crest of the continent for refueling for normal aircrafts. Not uncommon. Or in Iceland, or up here in this northern crest of Europe. So maybe it's a refueling stop. But why stop in Paris and in Goose Bay when you're flying a Falcon, which is specifically designed to basically fly as far as humanly possible? Right? Here's where it gets interesting. You're absolutely right to be suspicious. You got to be careful because this is AI getting all hype train. But the standard transatlantic business jet routing is apparently Cairo to maybe Shannon, Ireland, or Reykjavik, Iceland, and then you would just go to Lincoln or Provo. Or Cairo to Newfoundland, and then to Lincoln or Provo. Or just Cairo to Goose Bay, and then to Lincoln or Provo. Right? But these aircrafts are going Cairo to Paris, and then to Goose Bay, and then to Lincoln, Provo. So that's 2 stops when one would be all you would need for fuel, right? And if you're just going to get maintenance done, you're trying to be as efficient as possible. You're trying to go straight there, get your maintenance done, and come straight back. It's super expensive to fly all the way around the world, right? So why is the Paris stop suspicious? Le Bourget Airport, for context, is not a typical refueling stop. It's a primary French government and military aviation hub. It's home to the French Air Force VIP transport operations. It's a location of French intelligence and aviation operations, and it's a major diplomatic and VIP aviation center. It's not on the direct Great Circle route to Cairo for all you flat earthers. The optimal routing for Cairo to Lincoln or Provo, apparently, would be something like Cairo, Mediterranean, Atlantic, North America. Nah, it's getting fucking tripped up here. You just need 1 stop. Even if you're going to stop in Paris, just do 1 stop and refuel. Paris adds several hundred extra miles and extra fuel. It's expensive. It's inefficient. But it would make a ton of sense if there's French intelligence coordination on something. It would make perfect sense, right? Or if there's passenger exchanges, equipment transfers, mission briefings, documentation handoff, secure communications, whatever it is. And then obviously there's the Candace Owens piece now with the French Foreign Legion connections. And the fact that almost every Egyptian VIP flight follows the same pattern across multiple years in some cases is pretty weird. It's pretty weird. Okay? So maybe it's operational cover development, right? The Paris stop might provide plausible deniability, a time buffer. It might obscure the route. It puts any kind of criminal activity into multiple jurisdictions. If this is some sort of off-books military operation, it becomes harder and harder to track down. French Foreign Legion might be involved in this. But why Goose Bay specifically? Okay. Remember Goose Bay is way up there in the middle of nowhere? Goose Bay is super remote. Super remote. Limited oversight. It has a long military history. It's a former NATO base. It still has military operations. It has very little civilian traffic. There is customs and immigration, but it's way less intense. But it does have refueling infrastructure for large aircrafts. Okay. But instead, they could use normal places like Gander, Newfoundland, Reykjavik, Iceland, or Shannon, Ireland. All are major hubs that are super well established for refueling stops for tons of planes. So Goose Bay provides privacy, discretion, and minimal questions, right? But then it's like, let's put a counter on that. Let's like try to debunk that, right? What would make this Paris stop innocent? Well, if a bunch of other nations' aircrafts do the same thing, and I'm going to look into that. So I'm going to look at a whole bunch of other government crafts, and we'll see if we find it. If the Paris stops are short for just a few hours, that would make it look more like refueling. But in most cases, they stay for overnight, which is kind of weird. And if return flights didn't stop in Paris, that might also support it. And occasionally they don't. Sometimes they go straight to Wilmington, Delaware, and then all the way back to Cairo. But a lot of times they stop back in Paris afterwards, almost as if they had someone they had to drop off. Right? So then it has a little bit of flight data to go off of. And again, when you actually analyze the route, it's like, why the extra stops? Why the longer route? Why going out of your way? It's adding extra time. It's taking up extra fuel. It's complicated. Thousands of dollars of extra, apparently. Right? I don't know about this $500 million Boeing 747 controversy that it's referring to, but it makes no economic sense. It just doesn't make sense, right? The Paris stop is unnecessary. It's geographically inefficient. It adds cost, and it's consistent across multiple aircrafts over multiple years. Kind of weird. And so there's a bunch of investigation to help confirm this that I'm going to do this week. Okay? And I got a whole bunch more jet tail numbers to look into. Whole bunch of them. I got literally like the entire freaking Egyptian fleet ready to go. And I've been charting them in. I've been putting them into charts. I've been getting crazy with it. Been downloading data files and looking at flight paths and KML files and all this stuff. But here's the real big piece. Here's the big piece. At the very least, our government can clearly observe, we can all clearly observe multiple foreign planes that when they're not flying to the U.S., they're flying weird secret covert intelligence missions over the desert around Cairo. These are clearly covert operations planes that have all of this flight data going back years and years and years, that it's very obvious that they're doing military-style operations of some sort. Some sort of covert diplomatic or secret missions where their flight data is all weird and their transponders cut off. And the plane that was the most similar to that I could find on the flight maps, just kind of looking around at other planes, the plane that had the most similar flight data was this Egyptian or Italian military plane that is a freaking gangster. It's this Italian Gulfstream that I found that is registered to the Italian military that has all this missing flight data, where some cases its flight transponder turns off, in some cases its transponder is on. It's flying all around Ukraine. It's flying up to like Romania, Bulgaria, Latvia. All these flights that are pretty obviously military flights where like it'll fly out with its transponder on, then it'll turn its transponder off right next to Ukraine, and then later its transponder will turn back on. That is the plane that had the most similarity to the profile of what these Egyptian flights are doing. These Egyptian planes, when they're not over here in the United States, they're doing very similar types of stuff where they're like in Cairo, but all their flight data is just not there, right? And that's not to say that like that's not illegal. Cairo, Egypt is allowed to have military crafts doing these kinds of operations. But one would then surmise that we have very direct evidence of military covert government operative planes in Utah on the day that one of the greatest political assassinations of all times happened. Multiple planes of this type are there in Provo, Utah, very coincidentally, with a flight profile that seems to indicate that it was not a basic maintenance trip, because the flight profile does not make any sense for a basic maintenance trip. And anyone can see this and understand that. And I'm not even in the government. I don't even have, government has special access to special flight data. They have special transponders. The government would be able to see through most transponder spoofing and all sorts of other stuff. Like, the government would be able to look into this, right? And so at the very least, we have evidence of an Egyptian possible military operation surrounding, at least coincidental to, one of the most important political assassinations of all time. And so you're like, any government should be looking into these planes very directly. But then if you remember, Kash Patel came in and was like, there's no evidence of foreign involvement. This is an FBI matter. Everybody else get the fuck out of the way. Right? CIA, NSA, we don't need you. This is ours. FBI's got this. And FBI took point. Just like they took point on the Epstein files. Right? Even though this is obviously, clearly evidence that we need to be investigating foreign angles. Even before all the Israel stuff, even before the alleged assassination on Candace Owens as well, even before all of the weird evidence getting corrupted and manipulated and everything else. Just the fact that these planes are there with this flight profile that is publicly visible to everybody. I mean, the fact that they stop at Minot, which is one of our most nuclear capable bases, means that our government better already know what these planes are doing. And that's not necessarily a good story to tell. But these planes paint a very clear picture. And the rest of their flight data, that's all these weird flights over Egypt, maybe, is very suspicious. I'm not going to go into the other stuff, get into the weeds of looking at their transponders that I was doing, because I need to get more context on what is normal for weird military plane transponders. Because regular transponders, like I was looking at sort of more regular military planes, like this big old Airbus that's in the British RAF, or like I was looking at little crafts that seem to be used for like training flights. Bro's like practicing landings and stuff. Bro is practicing landings on runways. Bro is flying all kinds of weird circles and just getting wicked with it. He's just having a field day. And the transponders on planes like this are super fucking precise. Super precise. Like, they track a straight line down the runway when they land. Let me see where's my screenshot at. It's like, this is how precise transponders are. It's like right down the runway when they land. And so there's some weird transponder data on the Egyptian planes when they take off and land. But it's like, is that just because they're spy planes? Is that because they have funky transponders? Or is there something spoofy about their transponders? I don't know. Because this Italian spy plane, it's got some weird transponder stuff going on some of its takeoffs and landings. It's got some weird stuff going on. So I need to get some context, because it's got some funky data too. Who knows? Who knows? But I feel pretty confident that between the license plates that Candace dug up and the plane data that we can all see, I think that someone is right on the edge of figuring this whole thing out. Because if you follow Candace's reporting, if you kind of follow the people that she's poking, if you follow the Brigitte story, if you follow the Epstein to France connection, the Epstein to French and Israeli intelligence connections, if you know about the French Empire in West Africa, if you know about the history of the French Empire in general, the history of the Rothschild family that we went over the other night, you start to realize that Candace's reporting is touching on the real power structures in this world. And with Israeli support waning in America, and with this stuff getting exposed on a global scale, the biggest podcast in the world, this is way bigger than just a French dick, so to speak. Way bigger. Some of the real conspiracy theory heads in the chat will already know that if the Brigitte story truly goes mainstream and is widely accepted and investigated, if someone just pulls those pants down on live TV, holy shit. Who else do we start wondering about? Who else do we have some questions about? We have some questions. You start to ask questions about Yale and about Skull and Bones. You start to ask questions about like these dynasty families like the Bushes. You start to ask questions about the Rothschilds and about these old family traditions. And very quickly, the whole world is waking up to the real power structures behind everything. And they rely on the shadows. They rely on us being blind to the true power structures in this world. And I'm starting to suspect that Candace Owens is going to crack the whole thing wide open. And when you look at the pushback that she's getting, she's got this thing that she does where she pays attention to the pushback and she notices when there's weird pushback that doesn't make sense. And then she digs deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you watch people freak out where it doesn't make any sense. Like, why aren't we allowed to talk about Sigmund Freud? That's weird. Like, why aren't we allowed to talk about these old, like, Jewish mysticism cults that apparently died out hundreds of years ago? That's weird. Right? That's super weird. But it's not so weird once you start to see the pattern and once you start to see just exactly who Jean-Michel Hogneau is. Yeah, Jean-Michel, we know. And there's this huge Streisand effect going on right now, where the more of a fit they throw, the more obvious it becomes. And I'll just tease where we're going to go here next, probably on Friday, maybe tomorrow if we have time. You remember way back when Candace first told us about the time that Trump called her, asking her to stop reporting about Brigitte Macron and her dick? That was a hell of a phone call, right? That first episode, I just rewatched it. When she revealed that, she did not tell us who her friend was that called, that was the in-between, the go-between. But later, after Charlie was killed, she revealed that Charlie was the go-between there. And there is a lot of meat on that bone, so to speak. They had tried lawsuits. They'd tried threats. They'd tried basically bribery by like getting Trump to just straight up hold up the Ukraine deal. Keep the Ukraine-Russia war going unless Candace stops talking. That's insane. Right? A lot of these normies on Twitter right now, these Israeli propaganda bots on Twitter, are pretending like we don't remember that Emmanuel Macron legitimately held up war peace talks just so that he could ask Trump to call Candace to tell her to shut the fuck up because his lawsuit wasn't working. So, there's a lot more to go into here. There's a lot more research to be done. I've got a whole bunch more flights to look at. It's going to take a while. We are nowhere near done with this, but we're honing in. We see the shape. And I think that we all realize by now that, like, hey, if it was an Egyptian military operation, maybe our government should be asking Egypt some questions. But I think we all know that it was not an Egyptian military operation at this point. We're just waiting to find the smoking gun proof that will unlock the whole thing.
That would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet.